Dagda Connection, folks, hi, hello, and welcome. It's John O'Sullivan, your Pagan School, and we are here for another Wednesday morning video. And it is coffee time and chat and video time. And before we kick off, I just want to remind you again that we do have a free guide available for the classes and coursework over at the Irish Pagan School. It is a created kind of like workbook that allows you to kind of go through the content, target the content you want to go and go after in your education with us at the Art Pagan School, and also tick it off as you go so you know what you've covered. And we all know about forming good habits. I've talked about it, but there is that little bit of an endorphin kick when you have that achievement tick. So yeah, absolutely go through and pick that up if you are following along for the teaching at the Irish Pagan School. So this morning's kind of coffee thoughts and coffee talks are about, well, there's a lot of stuff that comes true, but there was one I picked out interestingly enough, which was a comment and a question from someone asking about the Dagda's connection with wind. Now, it's a funny one, absolutely. And to answer that question at the top end, he is definitely connected with wind because he is a very elemental deity. Like, we have in the records, we have in the stories, all of the information that connects him with pretty much all of the elements. So, to break it down, how he will be connected with wind, it's yeah. Let's kind of just go through it. So this person kind of contacted us. They were driving in the States with their partner, and they were heading along a highway or freeway, sorry, and they heard a noise, and they pulled off the freeway, and they're like, we're a little bit concerned, so we'll just stay here for the night. And as they were driving across a car park towards a parking spot where they were going to lodge, the front wheel came off their car. And so it was a shocking kind of circumstance. And, having pulled over and checked, they were just not sure, but they decided to kind of call it. And the next morning, as the car was being maintained, the person realized that, like, if it wasn't for the awareness of that, like, or the instinct something was actually wrong, despite a visual inspection that couldn't show, they could have been on the freeway going 75 miles per hour when the wheel came off. And in that moment of realization, they reached out to thank their gods for looking after them. And that's when they felt a gust of wind from behind so strong that it dumped them on their butt. And their impression and their feeling at the time was of the Dagda and his presence with them. And so they included their gratitude to him at that time. And so they were wondering, is he connected with wind? Could he be connected with wind? And the answer is absolutely yes. So when we go and look at the Dagda, like I've talked about it in a couple of other videos before, but he is one of the most powerful deities in the Tuatha De Danann, if not the most powerful, as acknowledged by them. So when we are on the run up to the second battle of Moitura, we have the meeting of the men of the goddess, where the Dagda, Gwyn, Nuada, and Oma all go off. I think the Incax as well. So Lou has just been taking the seat of the king, like, swap places with Nuada to take the seat of the king. And the rest of them go off to figure out, like, how are we going to do this? What are we going to do? And so they gather in, like, the druids, the cupbearers, and they gather in the sorcerers, and they ask them, like, how are you going to, what skills, what efforts are you going to offer to aid in the forthcoming war and invasion with the Fomorians? And so there's this lovely track where there's a long list of it. The cupbearers promise to hide all the rivers. The sorcerers promise to rain fire from the sky. The druids promise to call upon the names of all the mountains to cast themselves down at the enemies. But then also the druids promise to bind the urine inside the enemies so that, like, they would sicken. But then also, interestingly, the breath, they offer to kind of change the breath of the land, really, so that every inhalation would steal the valor from the Fomorians, whereas every kind of breath would enhance the valor of the Tuatha De Danann. And so this is the aspect that I really wanted to kind of touch on. So all of these things are promised by various individuals, but then the Dagda steps up and says, listen, everything you promised to do, I will take on and do myself. And this is when Nuada is like, yep, absolutely, that is the way it is. You are on Dagda, you are the good God. And it says that the name stuck to him from then on. So all of these things are promised. No one kind of gainsays, no one kind of questions. The Dagda says, I will, everything you said you want to do here, leave it to me. I got this. And no one questions that. No one hesitates. No one's like, everyone just it's done. It's as good as done. And so it's that aspect at the end when we look at the breath and this connection with valor. So that every breath of the Fomorians in Ireland will diminish their valor, whereas every breath of the Duodendain will raise their valor even unto the end of 7 years. That's the extra line in that. It shows that there is this control of breath, but that is wind, that is air, that is our personal wind that we actually make. So the Dagda's being ability to control, the breath and how it impacts on the body in those ways, to me, does indicate a clear understanding, a clear control and ability over the elemental powers of wind. There is one other element of wind, which, again, and it's a biological element of wind, which I think funnily connects with the story as well. One of the Dagda's many epithets or his names. It is later on in the same story, as the Fomorians invade, the Dagda goes to spy on the Fomorians to try and figure out, having met with the Morrigan at the River Unshin, had the prophecy about where the Fomorians are going to land. The Dagda goes in a kind of a disheveled guise. He goes as this like slovenly, oafish kind of character so that they would underestimate him. And so he goes into the Fomorian camp to try and get a read on them. But they have an idea that there is something off here, and they try and in multiple ways get him to cause offense to them, either by refusing hospitality of the food, even though they offer him like a ditch. They literally dig a ditch in the ground, put a whole load of porridge and offal into it, but he eats it and he kind of sustains it, and his body becomes gross and distended because of like the amounts that they fed him, which he couldn't deny because that would cause offense. So some people read the story and look at it as like, oh well, he was just a big mad hungry lad and he just gobbled up all the food. It's like he actually sacrificed his physical form and his pride to not cause offense, so that there will be no justification for war from the Fomorians, because at the moment their invasion is unjust. Bress was found to be an unjust king, and him going and getting the Fomorians to invade, it's an unjust invasion. But if the Dagda had given them cause of disrespect, inhospitality, anything like that at all, that would then justify their war. So looking at the bigger context of how this story fits within the culture of the time, and it really shows that the Dagda sacrificed a heck of a lot. And so the sacrifices continue, because as he leaves the camp, his belly distended over him because of what he had to do. And on down the road, he meets the daughter of Indech, and she's been put there to again try and get offense. And so she cuts into him, verbally. She kind of slates him. She demands him to carry her on her back, and again demeaning him. And if he gives slight, if he kind of strikes out at her, anything like that at all, she has justification for back. Her dad, I was slighted by him. It's war. And so the dad is like, I can't do it because of my current condition. And she literally kicks the shit out of him. It says she kicks him until he voids all of that was in him out of him. And at that point, she's like, okay, well, now carry me on your back. And he's like, okay, but she's like, well, you have to clean yourself off. So he ends up stripping off his shirt and cleaning himself with it, so that he's then stripped naked and having literally been physically accosted by her. I'm getting off track, but the one last thing, he tries to get her to not go through with this, and he says, I can't carry you on my back unless I can't carry anyone on my back unless they know my name. And she's like, well, tell me your name. And so we have this section of the story where she talks about this kind of triplicate questioning. And so by the time she asks him 3 times, he's compelled at that point to give his full name. And what comes out in the story is this fantastic piece of Rosk poetry. Rosk poetry being one of the oldest forms of Irish poetry that we know, which is an interweaving and linking of all of these different words, but then the meanings of each word changes depending on what words come before or after it. So you have this lovely, multifaceted, multi-layered expression of identity defining himself in this 2 lines of poetry. Now, I've tried my best to memorize it. I'm not the greatest at it, and the words don't seem to stick, oddly. But there's a beautiful translation done of it by Isolde Bullock on Carmody in Harp Club and Cauldron, A Harvest of Knowledge. It's a compendium dedicated to the Dagda. and it breaks down all of the words, but then also translates them and then translates them in connection with the words before and after. And one of the names on here to bring it back around to this connection with wind, one of the names that Dagda gives for himself is Bromage. And Bromage translates as great farter, to be honest. So, he's described in so many ways this massive guy, like, many of the other words in it, like, just talk about his size. Ver Ben Bruch is the first kind of line. So it's this man of the peaks, or this horned, or like, man. I prefer the translation man of the peaks, so he's like a mountain man. But also if we connect that to Murius being the 12 pinnacles, and the fortress of Murius where he originally came from. Different story for a different day. Remind me in the comments maybe to come back to that one. But he refers himself as Bromwich, which is this farter, this great lap farter. And so, that then connects him with wind again in another way. I did a video recently enough, actually, and it's Dank is not a sky father. And that, to be clear on that, most people connect the power of wind with sky. In the same way, you've got fire with sun, you've got earth with earth, you've got water with like ocean, rivers, etc. But wind doesn't have to be linked specifically with sky. So he's not a sky father. That's a different video, but he is connected with wind, and it is possible. I personally, to loop it into my own experiences, I have felt him in the wind. One of the names for the staff that he picks up, the club, is uh, let me get it right. I think it's Cor Anfiha. And Anfiha is an old translation for storm. So it's a storm stave. And we see him when he battles the Mata, the sea monster that had invaded, and he kind of drives the sea off of Ireland. Like, we see him use this storm stave to move and to shift the literal ocean out of it. So there's a lot that kind of connects him with that energy and with that kind of elemental force. And I have always loved storms. I'm one of those odd people that if it's lashing rain and gale forcing outside, I will probably go out into it for the experience of the kind of elemental energy of storm. And I have found my connection with him in there, as well as in the quiet times, as well as in front of the fire hearth, as well as in front of the kitchen making food. Like, I have felt his presence, but I've also been buffeted by the wind and dropped on my ass and then felt him laugh at me. And laughed as well because it was a good joke at the time. Usually when I was kind of not focusing where I want to be, I'd get buffeted and dropped. So yeah, in my personal opinion, as well as the stories as I presented them, I do see that the diet is connected with wind, but he is connected with everything else. His working of the land to make the wrath breath. The fact that he knows the names of all the mountains and can cast the stones upon an invading army. He can call fire down from the sky. Fire being an expression of the sun, and we know that the sun is part of his elements, his raiments of authority. He lists that himself when he takes up the club. He has authority over the sun, moon, land, and sea. And the one he doesn't list is sky. And so his powers and his abilities are very ranging and very broad. And for him being one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful of the Tuatha in his own way, he doesn't dominate with that energy. And that's one thing that really strikes me about the Dagda compared to other kind of deities out there of his ilk or on his level. Um, and this to me is where I have found a deeper connection with myself as a masculine presenting individual and seeking out masculine presenting deity. Where is healthy masculine representation deity? And before the Dagda, I had hesitations about everybody, because all of them use their powers to dominate. He uses his powers to serve. Now, again, perspectives. It's rough of me to cast aspersions on other kind of pantheons because I'm not of that culture, and I am being very clear here. Personal opinion on that one, but all of mythology of Zeus using his ability to, have sex with as many human people as he can and bring forth children. Okay, that's his agenda, but that made me uncomfortable. Like, the stories of Odin, like, manipulating and tricking people into and out of their own power for the enhancement of his power. Again, not a great deity, but for all of the power of the Dagda, like for all of his abilities, anywhere we find him in the stories, he's doing something in service to others. He's doing something in service to his community, to his tour, to his family. Like Angus getting himself in over his head, making promises he can't keep. Oh, I promised to clear an entire forest. And the Dagda's like, fine. And he goes and clears an entire plain worth of forests in one night. And Angus comes back the next night. He's like, "Oh, I promised I'd irrigate that entire new plain." And Tiger's like, "Fine." And he goes and drags an entire river on the plain the next night. So all the stories that we have with the Tiger is him doing stuff for others. Now, he's not perfect. I'm not saying he's a perfect deity. I think I covered that in some of the other stuff as well, a lot of the other videos. Like, he's a killer. He absolutely straight up, like, charges a battle line in the first battle of Moitura against the Firbolg and cleaves a space 150 people wide for his forces to follow him. Like, he's a warrior, and he's also a murderer. Though in the story, when he picks up the club, he loses himself over his grief of his child Kermit, who's been killed by Lou. Um, and in the seeking to bring him back to life, he finds the magic glove, but he kills the three brothers who have possession of the glove in order to take it. He then restores them because Kermit called him out on it, but it still shows his fallibility. And I think that, coupled with his power, really shows the control and the elements of his character that comes along with his service to others, his compassion and care to like use the power you have for the right reasons, and not always for yourself, for the care of others and the community. So, to loop it back to that story that was shared, yeah, absolutely, the Dagda is the kind of person who would go out of his way and use his powers and abilities to safeguard and to care for those of community, those who, whether they honor him or not. Actually, you don't have to be a Dagda follower to get Dagda protection. I've met many people in my journey who they're like, yeah, this weird thing kind of happened, and I'm really not sure why it happened. Do you think it was the Dagda? And I'm like, do you think it was the Dagda? And here's some information, go figure it out, because it's not for me to say if it is or isn't. And then they invariably like do their own research and come back, and many of them are like, yeah, actually the Dagda presence in my life has helped me or has changed my life or assisted me in many ways. So, long ramble story. As I said, it is our morning coffee and chat, but the Dagda is a very elemental god. He's a very, very powerful god, but that doesn't mean he is above looking out for the individual whenever they have a need of him. And, he's the kind of god who'll sidle up beside you and fart for the laughs, which I have experienced as well. All of the fun and entertainment. So I do hope that has answered the question and given a bit of an insight or a perspective onto Dagda's connection with elemental forces and why and how he uses his power. So thank you very much for being part of our community. Again, that resource, that free resource, it's down in the links. You can grab it. It helps kind of structure out because there's so many classes in the Irish Pagan School now. It helps you kind of focus in and say, okay, well, these are the areas I want to study. I want to look into the Ulster cycle. So you want Laura's Queen Knave class, you want my Ulster kind of cycle classes, or I want to go into the mythological cycle, or I want to look at specifically Marian stuff, or I want to look at specifically Dagda stuff. This resource kind of helps you categorize your journey through the Irish Pagan School. And again, tick it off as you go, have that kind of sense of this is what I'm working for and working towards, which, is your own personal growth and enhancement in spirituality, hopefully. That's why we do all of this. So until next time, look after yourself, take care, Gurus Mila Mahakas Agus Thank you and goodbye.